welcome everybody. As Eric said, I'll be walking us through the new Excel collaboration in Forecast Pro. For those of you who are part of the webinar, our previous webinar, where we talked through all of the new features in Forecast Pro TRAC version 6, we walked through the interface and all of the new niceties that were built into the system. We kind of saved this Excel collaboration for its own webinar because it is a more in-depth and detailed topic. So, what's actually new in the Excel collaboration? Well, as the name suggests, the primary way for us to work now is to export export overrides into Excel so folks can actually make changes within Excel itself. So unlike the current version of the software where all overrides must be made internally in Forecast Pro, this allows us to export the overrides and work within Excel. This makes it so folks who are more comfortable with Excel, as opposed to having to learn a new software package like Forecast Pro for them to make changes, as well as to basically spread the overrides around to other folks. So what this means is we can actually break up the hierarchy in Forecast Pro into multiple smaller subsets. This allows us to have one master Forecast Pro project that we can break up and distribute the overrides to multiple collaborator users to make their changes. And because they'll be making them in Excel, they'll have access to it anywhere that they have their Excel installed. We also have the ability to select from multiple templates. So the way we export this data can now be specified in different ways. Currently in the program, there's 2 templates, although there may be more in future releases of the software. Right now, you can technically export your overrides from Forecast Pro. So if you were using version 5 or earlier, you can export your forecast to Excel and you can manipulate them a bit, make some changes and bring them back into Forecast Pro, but it requires a lot of manual manipulation and really understanding how this works. In the new version of the software, we have a manager that basically controls all of this process. It makes it much more seamless to work in Excel and move the data back and forth when we're making these overrides. So what are some of the advantages of doing this? Well, the first is that you can take advantage of all of the functionality that's built into Excel. So those of you who have done training with me know that a lot of times when we look at the overrides, what we end up doing is we say, okay, well, we're trying to mimic as much of Excel as possible. Well, now we can really have the full feature because we're actually working in Excel itself. So this allows us to do much more complicated formulas and allows us to build our own customization around these adjustments that we are making. It also means we can manage all of the collaboration from a single project. Right now in Forecast Pro, if I want to work with multiple users, a lot of times what I have to do is I actually have to build individual projects for each individual user and then potentially combine them back together in a super project. This is somewhat clunky and a little bit kind of backwards how a lot of folks tend to think about this. So now what we can have is just one master project. From this master project, I can export smaller subsets of either my hierarchy or based off of other information and pass it off into these sub-Excel files where people can work on them and they can make their changes, and then I can basically consolidate all of those changes into this one project that I am managing. And because I'm breaking the data into smaller Excel files, this allows multiple users to collaborate simultaneously. I can make individual Excel files for each of my individual collaborators and push it out to them. They'll open it in Excel, they'll make their changes, and then I can just import those changes back. So this way, everyone can work simultaneously. I only maintaining one project within Forecast Pro, which is much easier to manage, and it allows me to use the full functionality of Excel. And especially if I'm giving this to other folks, whether it's in sales or marketing or management or operations, who are more comfortable working in Excel, they don't need to learn a new tool like Forecast Pro. You simply provide them with these spreadsheets for them to make their changes. So all of these advantages make it much easier to work in groups when it comes to actually applying different overrides in your own business knowledge to the forecast itself. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at it in the system. So here's a project that I've loaded into Forecast Pro version 6, and this is our current interface that we would normally be doing overrides. We have our statistical forecast here, we have multiple override rows where I can bring information in, and we have our final forecast. We can also see the data graphically as well as numerically, so I can see both of these windows open at the same time. This is our current structure and how we would usually work in the system. What's new and how we're going to do this in the new process is to use our Excel collaboration button right here on our home screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and bring up our collaboration manager. And that's what this really is. It is a manager to manage your entire process of making overrides in the tool. So what you'll see here is a way of us creating these spreadsheets that we want to use. The first thing we need to do is pick the template that we're going to use. Currently, we have 2 templates available to us by selection and in place. I'm going to start with the in place template, but I will show you both during this demonstration. Next, we need to pick where the Excel files are going to be saved. I'm currently pointing to my local public documents folder, but if you were working in a team, you'll probably be pushing this to some sort of shared drive or some sort of network drive where I can push my data to. So I'm going to pick what template I want to use and where I want to export it to. Next, I need to actually define the data that I'm going to pull out. Now, one key aspect of this, a current requirement, is that we need to pick what level of the hierarchy we want to push out. At the moment, we are only going to push out one level at a time. So any of these spreadsheets will only output data at one level of the hierarchy at a time. You can choose whichever level you want, but it will be a single level output. So here in my sample file, I have 4 levels to choose from: the total, the category, the warehouse, or the SKU. I'm going to push out at my SKU level. I also need to determine where I'm going to bring these overrides back into. Which row am I going to load it into? If you actually move this box over, you can see again, I have my override rows. I have sales, management, and a 3rd row available to me. So I can choose any of these rows to import my overrides back into, or I can create a new separate row to say that this is an Excel collaboration. So I can actually create a new row called Excel collaboration where I will bring these overrides into. That way I can maintain the current overrides that I have in my project and add a new row for this to go into. I also need to define what date range I want. So currently you can see I'm just pushing out the forecast of April through March of 2021 by going out this far. But let's say I only want to go out 6 months. So when I'm giving this information, while the project will go out a year into the future, I only want to give the folks to make changes for the next 6 months. I can also go backwards in time and include parts of the history. So I can go back and say, starting from January of 2020, show me the last 3 months of history and the first 6 months of forecast. So I can create a range of data in these output files that I am producing, okay? Then, now that I've picked what level of the hierarchy that I would like, as well as where this is going to come back, and what date range I'm going to use, I need to pick which items or hierarchy structures I'm going to actually push out. Now, the default is to push everything into a single spreadsheet. So you can see down below, it actually says my total items. So in this sample file that I'm using, I have about 2,400 SKUs that are available to me. And I could push this out into one single spreadsheet and just have one spreadsheet with all of my changes in it. But most likely, if you're going to be working with multiple users at this point, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to actually break up my hierarchy into smaller pieces and just give each collaborator a piece from which that they will be responsible for. The first way we're going to do that is through the filters. Okay, so just to take a minute, we have run this webinar actually earlier today, and a bunch of the questions had to do with the filters. So I want to take a minute for those of you who are unfamiliar with the filters. The filters are a separate file that you can bring into Forecast Pro. So it is separate from your history. It's not defined by your hierarchy. Filter information comes into the system. It can be applied at any level, and you can have as many filters as you want. So the filters do not appear in the hierarchy, but they can appear in the graphs, they can appear in the reports, and they can appear in the output. Now with this new Excel collaboration, we've added a new role to the filters, allowing us to break up the data into different pieces. So in my case here, I actually have 3 filters that I have loaded in. I've loaded in ABC classification for all of my SKUs. I've loaded in a salesperson responsible, so each SKU has now been assigned a salesperson who's responsible for that. And I've brought in a warehouse type, so at the warehouse level of my hierarchy, I have different types of warehouses if I want to break that up as well. So a common way here that we're going to look at is by salesperson. So what I've done is I've brought in a filter file that for each SKU assigns a different salesperson. And you can see for this salesperson filter, I have multiple values. So in my filter file, I have 4 different salespeople, and each salesperson has been assigned the specific SKUs that they're responsible for. So I can do this one at a time. So for instance, if I choose Bill, I can create an Excel spreadsheet with the SKUs that Bill is responsible for, and it will be a single file. You can also see the total number of SKUs has dropped down to 662. So we have about 2,400 total SKUs. Bill is responsible for just over 600 of those. So now that I have defined the template to use, I've defined the hierarchy level, I've defined the date range, and the subset of data that I want to use. Now I'm going to actually export this. I'm going to click this button here that says export, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this Bill's SKUs. These are his SKUs that he's in charge of. I'll go ahead and save. And what you'll see is it creates this template over here. It says, here's Bill's SKUs. It's already been created. Here's the date. Here's the number of items that were there available to it. So I've created a single file for my individual salespeople. Now, if I wanted to, I could do this in a batch process. So for instance, if I say filtered multiple files, I again pick which filter that I want to use to actually filter out the data. I'm going to use salesperson again. And what I could do is I could actually pick the other 3 salespeople, Jennifer, Mike, and Sarah. And now I can export these. And what you'll see is instead of creating a single spreadsheet just for Bill, it's going to create 3 spreadsheets, one for each of my other 3 salespeople, for Jennifer, Mike, and Sarah. So I can do this all in one big batch as well. You can see it puts the default names. It says it was based off the salesperson, and it says which salesperson in the names of the files themselves. So when I'm creating these Excel spreadsheets, I need to determine how I'm going to break up the data. I can do it one at a time, or I can do it in a big batch process like this. So now that I've created this, let's go ahead and take a look at what I've done. One of the good parts about the manager here is I can actually right-click on any of these spreadsheets that I've created, and one of the options is to simply go ahead and open it in Excel, which is what I'm going to do. It's going to go ahead and open up over here, and here it is. So this has been brought over into Excel and allows me, and what you can see is I have this very specifically formatted template for making my adjustments. What you'll see is at the top, I have my graph, which is showing me my information. It has my history and my forecast, as well as any of my updates. I can see the data down below numerically in one big long grid like this. So I can see here's the last 3 months of history, and here's the next 6 months of forecast. And because I'm in Excel, I can use all of Excel's functionality. So if I wanted to filter the data, I could sort it largest to smallest, look for specific values, etc. Now I can come in here and actually make changes very easily in a couple of different ways. The easiest would be to just type in a change. So if I came in here and I said, look, I want to sell 900 units here, you'll see that it enters my 900. You see the cell turns orange, so it can mark that I've made a change here. You can also see that it's updated the graph to show my change that's available to me. So I can make very direct changes just by typing. We also have some of the Forecast Pro buttons up here for a percent increment in value, just like we would in the previous version of Forecast Pro. So if I were to highlight a range of data, what I could do is I could come in here and say, look, I want to raise this 25%, and hit the percent button. And you'll see it will increase each by 25%. What I'm also able to do is, just like in Forecast Pro, what's the most important thing when making a change? To enter a comment. So I can come over here and add a comment to this, and I'll say raised each 25%. And the comments appear just like they would in Excel. So if I hover over them, they're using these comment features. This is also something that will come into Forecast Pro, so my comments will come in as well. One of the other niceties is after I make a change, if I wanted to, I could also undo it. This is a function that we don't even have in Forecast Pro, but it's great because it's in Excel. I can actually come over here and say Restore Forecast, and actually I have to click on the cell here and hit Restore Forecast, and it will actually bring it back to the original forecast that we had. So I can have an undo feature if I'm making these changes. Also, because this is in Excel, I can actually make my own formulas. So for things like if I wanted to do a sum of the 6 months, I could come in here and say equal sum over here in these cells, and I actually can make my own sum column down below. I can just say this is the sum. So I'm able to create all of this extra information beyond this, which is really great. The other thing that we are able to do is we are able to create additional tabs in here. So if I wanted to create my own worksheets and I wanted to create my own formulas and I want to do a bunch of calculations off of this, that is also possible because again, we're working within Excel, and so the full functionality of Excel is available to us. Now, a couple things to note about these spreadsheets. These are a Forecast Pro template, which means it has a lot of information going along with it. What you'll also note is I have a Forecast Pro tab now in Excel. In order for this to work, you are going to need an add-in for Excel to make these spreadsheets open. So if you were to give this to someone who does not have a Forecast Pro add-in in their version of Excel, this file will not open. So it is protected and it does require the Forecast Pro add-in. A big question that comes on is how do we get the add-in? The add-in is included with your copy of Forecast Pro. So if you have a Forecaster license or a Collaborator license, it will install both the Forecast Pro application as well as the add-in for Excel. So this will work. It does mean we have changed slightly the licensing of the software in the sense that now the license currently is single user, single machine. Now that is still true, but if you want to have this add-in, you do need to purchase a license of Forecast Pro. So a Forecaster license or a Collaborator license now comes with two pieces. It comes with the Forecast Pro application and the Excel add-in. So if you do have, say, 5 people who want to make changes in Excel, it will require 5 Collaborator licenses so that they can get the add-in to make this work. So there's a big question here in terms of how the licensing works. So I just wanted to clarify that you will need the add-in in order to continue to work because it requires you to use all of this to have the editing buttons, all of these things, and having all of this format to work. So here in Excel, I can make these changes. I can do all of my work. And when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and save this and close it out. And now I can come back to Forecast Pro. If I want to bring this back in, I will simply go to my Import tab, and you can see that you can see all of my templates that are here. You can now see that this SKU file that I was just working on has been modified externally. So it tells you that this has been updated at this point. Someone has gone into Excel, opened it, and made changes. To import it, I would go ahead and hit Import. Just give this a minute to go grab all the data and bring everything into the system. And here we go. Now, if I close out of this box, you can see we've created, because I specified I wanted to go into this Excel collaboration row. So it made this green row over here. And you can see the overrides that I brought in. You can also see that these items have a comment associated with them because it brought in not only the adjustment that I made, but it also brought in the comments that I had made at that point as well. So I can make all of these files, I can edit them in Excel, and then I can bring all of them back. And the manager really is a manager. So I'm not only creating these and importing these. One of the other tabs here, the middle tab, which is important to understand, is the updating tab. One of the things that's important to realize is that this process will probably be replicated every time you work in Forecast Pro. So every week, every month, every quarter, however often you come back to Forecast Pro, you're going to want to replicate these steps. So the Creation tab is to set up the layout of all of these spreadsheets that I will want to use. But when you come back for your next forecasting cycle, you don't want to create them from scratch every month. You want to come over and update. You say, look, I want to recreate these files, but I want to update them. I want to update bill SKUs with the latest data. So I would simply update it using all the templates that I have. Now, the good part about the updating is that it is just populating the tabs within the spreadsheet that Forecast Pro needs. So in my example where I created a second tab and made a whole bunch of other calculations, those will still be there. Whereas if I created it, I would actually overwrite the file that's there and you would lose all this extra work that you were working on. So I don't recommend that. What you should be doing is coming in here and each month just updating it. So I'm going to create the layout of here's the spreadsheets that I want every period, and then each time I update the data, I'm going to come to my Update tab and just refresh all of these with the latest information in them. And again, once I've made those changes, I'd come to the Import, bring it in, and import the data this way. So it is really a process here. This is why we call it a collaboration manager, because we are managing all of the collaboration from here. We're not just creating spreadsheets every month. What we're doing is we're creating the actual process that we're going to use, and then each period we come back, we're going to update it and then import it once people have made changes. So that is a very important distinction here, that this is a replicable function. We want to basically be able to replicate this every forecasting cycle so that we can continue to use it on an ongoing basis. Okay, so the other thing I do want to show you is I do want to show you the other template, which is I've been using the in place. The other one is by selection. So I can show you what this looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this for Bill again. So I'm going to create a spreadsheet for Bill, but this time it's going to be by selection. And so when I create this, I'm going to give it a different name. I'm going to call it Bill SKUs by selection, so we know it's a separate file. It has the same SKUs in it, has the same series in it, it just is in the new layout. It's over here by selection. So I'm going to go ahead and open this one up in Excel. Now, in this format that we're looking at, what you're able to do is you're able to see the graph, but now we actually are replicating the override view that you would normally see in Forecast Pro. So if I come back over here, you can see I'm replicating this view over here. This is what I'm replicating. So we've replicated this in Excel. So we can see the different override rows, the starting point and the ending point. We can also see the last 3 months of history. We can see this graphically. What I'm now able to do is filter for specific items. So you can see here are the different items that Bill is responsible for. Here are the overrides that I had made in the other template. I can come over here and make changes. Now, whenever you do make changes, you can't actually change in these rows themselves. In fact, if I try to type, you'll see it's locked out. What we need to do is make the changes down here in this yellow row. This is where we actually make the overrides. So if I wanted to set this to 200 units, I could go ahead and do that. Again, I want to put a comment and we'll say set at 200. So I can put a comment in there. We need to make the changes here. If you want to use formulas, let me make something that's a little bigger. If we want to use formulas, we could say, equals the forecast times 3, and you'll actually be able to see it that way. Again, using the formulas that are allowed in Excel. So I can start doing my own kind of customization in Excel. And I'll say set to 9 units. And once again, if I save this, and I'll close out of it, I can come back to Forecast Pro, come back to my collaborator. I want to come in and import this. So here's my, again, it's been modified, so I want to import. And here we go. And now you can see, here are the adjustments that I made over here to these items. So I was able to import it that way. So again, we have 2 predefined templates at the moment. There are by selection and in place, and these allow us to make changes in different ways, and it's really your own preference. You can have as many of these spreadsheets as you would like. There really is no limit, although from a practical standpoint, ideally what you would be doing is you would be creating a single spreadsheet for each of your users who are going to make adjustments. So you're going to create a spreadsheet per person, usually is the kind of thing that we would be looking at. Now, up until this point, I've been breaking up the data using the filters, and I've been doing it based off of these filter information that I've brought into Forecast Pro already. We also can do it dynamically using the hot list. So if I wanted to, I can create hot lists of information to also break up my data. So for instance, if I wanted to work on mufflers in Chicago North, and I'll open up New York, what I've done is I've created a hot list with all of my mufflers in these 2 warehouses. So I've created this hot list. I could also, I can come over here now to my Excel collaboration, and I could create one of these based off of my hot list as it exists. So if I go ahead and do this, it can say this would be my mufflers in Chicago and New York. So by using the hot list, I can dynamically create a template of here's a subset of data that I want. You can see these 350 items, they were exported just based off of dimensions that I already have in my hierarchy. So either I can load the way to break up the project with my filters, or I can create this based off of my hot lists. And of course, the hot lists themselves can be saved. So if I wanted to, I could browse and just open up one of these hot lists. And if I have a saved hot list in here, I'm able to create hot lists that are able to, if I have different ones, I can create different sets this way. So again, I can either use the filters to break up my data or the hot list. And the hot list, of course, uses the hierarchy structure to break up my data and how I actually break my information apart and export it over to Excel. So that's the basic functionality that's in here. I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the requirements as it currently stands. So there are some requirements to make this work in the current version of the software. The first, as we already talked about, is you can only export to a single level. So at the moment, there is no consolidation of the hierarchy. There's no reconciliation logic built in. And this makes sense. So I can't, make a change down an end item and see how that affects my total. If you want to see that kind of hierarchical reconciliation, you're going to need to continue to use Forecast Pro interactively. That's what it's there for. One of the limitations of the Excel files is that I am only looking at one level at a time. Another limitation as it currently exists is its override mode only. We do not support incremental adjustment mode at this point. It's something we may look into the future, although the vast majority of our folks use override mode. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you don't even know the difference, which is fine. So it won't matter because 95% of our users use override mode. But if you do use incremental adjustment mode, unfortunately, that is not supported at this time. Also, we currently need everything to go in the default hierarchy and the default units. So the base units, base hierarchy, that's all we will export at this point. We're currently looking into expanding that so that you can export in multiple hierarchies or in multiple units. That is something that is being worked on now and will probably be added to a future release. But as it stands right now, the data has to be exported in the default hierarchy and the default units. So these are some of the requirements that currently exist in the program. We are always looking to try to improve this, obviously. So there are some, again, we are looking at allowing you to export in multiple hierarchies or multiple units, but these are some of the requirements as the program exists right now. Okay. Now, just a few more things as we wrap up here, and then we'll take your questions. So again, if you have questions, please use the interactive part now. We'll get to those in a few minutes. What I've covered is just sort of a basic demo of the software. If you want to see more in-depth information about this, the two main places you should look are the Forecast Pro manual and our YouTube page, okay? The Forecast Pro manual is in a PDF form. It came with Forecast Pro, so you do have this installed. It has a full tutorial and really goes into the details of how to set up all of these files, the filter files as well, how to use the manager and what the different templates look like. You can access the manual in the program by going to the Help tab up at the top. And you can see we have an accessibility to the different documentation that we have here. These will open up PDFs that are fully searchable, so you can get information about that. Also, of course, we have our YouTube channel, youtube.com/forecastpro. They have quick starts. We have webinars on a lot of these different pieces, including this webinar today will go up there as well. It's a very good place to look at different resources that we have available to us.